What's up, gamers? Did you know that I have a comic and the comic is also becoming a book? I know, crazy, right? Yes, the comic is called Aurora. It is a high fantasy webcomic that I write and draw myself, and I'm having a really good time making it. And apparently, enough people are also having a really good time reading it that it's getting physically published as a book, or at least the first 11 chapters are. Volume 1 is going to be hitting shelves at the end of July, but if you are interested and you would like to pre-order it, you can do that using one of the links that I have in the description that will take you to a whole bunch of links that you can use. Also, if you're just curious to read it, you can find the whole thing online at comicaurora.com. And I hope you have fun. Okay, back to the video. I'm sorry I called you gamers. Every superpower brings with it a fascinating host of whack implications as the audience is invited to ponder the tangible ramifications of a wholly fictional power set. Does a character with super strength snap off the handle of every push door they thought was a pull? How can a flying brick pick up and move a building without the brickwork crumbling around them? Can you chuck a fireball without violating conservation of energy, or turn into a T-Rex without violating conservation of mass? Does Spidey sense just feel like anxiety but more? Why can't Aquaman talk to whales? If an energy blast misses its target and shoots off into the sky, does it just keep going through space until it hits something? Now, some of these are nitpicks, and some of them are blatant misapplications of real physics onto fictional settings where they explicitly do not apply, but not every superhero shower thought is created equal. Sometimes the confusion is wholly internal to the power itself, because the rules and mechanisms by which it works in-universe are confusing, inconsistent, or unclear. And that's something that any fan, writer, or fan-writer can just notice by thinking about it too hard. And in my experience, no power set inspires more of this internal confusion than the seemingly simple superpower of super speed. Now, on paper, super speed has only one very simple rule. Gotta go fast. A character with an ability of this type can move fast, run fast, talk fast, and maybe even think fast once in a while. Speedsters, as they are colloquially called, pop up all throughout fiction in varying forms, and they have one gimmick, and that gimmick is speed. The problem with speedsters, when compared to the other major super types, is that the whack implications of their power set are extremely close to the surface and become clear if one just briefly tries to imagine what it would be like to have them. With powers like super strength, it's pretty easy to intuit what that would feel like. Heavy things feel lighter, solid things feel bendier, fragile things pop more easily. Even a complex power like telepathy can be felt out pretty simply. Depending on how much control the character has, it'd probably feel like being in a noisy crowd of people, or hearing someone else's inner monologue as your own, or being able to read the thought bubbles on the comic page. Things get a little dicier with characters like Batman, whose powers are mostly detective ability and absolute butt-tons of martial arts training, two experiences most people do not have frames of reference for, but it's still pretty easy, comparatively speaking, to imagine that you can just look at somebody and instantly deduce everything there is to know about them, or to imagine winning a really cool fight against a whole bunch of interchangeable ninjas. For all their complexity and fridge logic, a lot of superpowers produce easy characterization to slip into and study from the inside. Super speed frequently does not, because as soon as we start trying to get inside the character's head, we slam straight into one extremely foundational question. How does this speedster perceive the world? This is an incredibly important question when it comes to understanding a character and how they operate. What does the world look and feel like to them? How do they have to carry themselves through it day to day? And the reason this is specifically dicey with speedsters is because many stories broadly cannot make up their minds between two fundamentally totally incongruous worldviews. Either the speedster moves through the normal world in super high speeds, or the speedster moves through a frozen slow motion world at what they perceive to be regular speed. And those two experiences should feel completely and utterly different. Right? Well, let's start unpacking this and see what we find. Broadly, I think super speed as a power set can be broken up into 4 component parts, with the lines between them occasionally blurring. The foundational baseline part that pretty much every speedster has is run fast. If a speedster can't zoom from point A to point B, what's even the point of them? First they were here, now they're way over there, just like that. This is the simplest kind of super speed to write, and also the easiest to imagine. If you can run, you can imagine doing that but faster, covering more ground per step. Heck, maybe unlike normal running, it feels almost effortless, like zooming along in a fast car with the windows down. Just pick a direction and go, with nothing but the wind in your hair and the horizon rolling up to you. Simple, clean, fun to think about, and easy to understand. 10 out of 10, no notes. Run fast speedsters get a lot of fight choreography mileage out of the simple stratagem of run really fast at the enemy and let Newton's second law do all the work, and are popular superhero staples, capable of such extra fun stunts as running across water or up vertical surfaces, on the general principle that if you run fast enough, the laws of physics can't catch you. The second part of the speedster power set is move fast, which is distinct from run fast because it covers all kinds of movement. Punching, kicking, disassembling a handgun into its component pieces. It's pretty common for a speedster to zip through a crowd of interchangeable bad guys and come out the other side with an armload of confiscated weapons and the occasional wallet. The DC speedsters, aka the various Flashes, use this space of the power set to phase through objects by vibrating their whole body at super speed. It's pretty rare for a dedicated speedster to only be able to run fast without the broader space of move fast attached, or at least the subcategory of punch fast, but this is the part of the power set where we start to see the edges of the speedster perception problem looming. When the speedster does something super fast, do they feel themselves doing it fast, or does it feel normal to them? Are they casually walking through a frozen gallery of statues, plucking guns from hands and inducing wedgies, or are they zipping around with the wind in their hair and a grin on their face having a grand old time? To bring things back to comparative simplicity, the third aspect of the power set is react fast. This covers characters who can do things like dodge or catch bullets, zip out of the way of threats before they've consciously clocked their presence, or avoid plowing through an obstacle in their way when they're charging at 100 miles an hour. And weirdly, while this one feels like a foundational power of the speedster perception problem because it involves spotting and reacting to threats impossibly quickly, I actually think it avoids most of the perception problem because in ordinary non-speedster humans, reaction time is not a conscious thing. When something gets thrown at your head, you don't assess the situation, you dodge or you catch it, often a split second before you're even aware it was happening at all. A reflex happens below conscious thought, and usually a whole lot faster than conscious thought. A speedster hypothetically does just that, but with faster things. Something's coming at you, quick, catch it! Oh, cool, it was a bullet. More for me. Because it's a reflexive action, not a conscious one, it doesn't indicate that the speedster has to be perceiving reality in slow motion for it to work. In fact, plenty of characters who aren't speedsters have the react fast power without any of the think fast baggage, because it's pretty much mandatory to be able to dodge, block, or catch bullets, which is the superhero genre's favorite entry-level trick. This is also a common way for broadly dangerous warriors to show off by doing things like catching arrows or slicing bullets in half midair while never displaying any sort of official superheroic super speed beyond that. But all that simplicity vanishes when we get to the final part of the speedster power set, think fast. And this is the most complicated one, where the core of the speedster perception problem lies. Because some speedsters can do things like read books at super speed, or assemble and disassemble highly complex machinery, or in the most overt cases, enter bullet time, where they see the world around them as pretty much completely frozen, while they can move around it at or above normal speed. These speedsters' minds move quick as lightning, and so they can think, feel, and understand things orders of magnitude quicker than ordinary people. The real question is that how they see the world all the time? And bluntly, the answer is almost always very clearly no. A speedster who can slip into time-in-a-bottle mode definitely does not do that all the time, because they can do things like carry a conversation or get surprise punched by normal not speedster people, indicating that they absolutely do not always have the luxury of super slow-mo. But it's very rarely clearly explained, and that starts to beg the question, how do they see the world? Do they perceive their own actions as fast, or do they see everyone else as slow, or maybe even some combination of the two, where everyone else is frozen, but they still get to feel like they're zipping around? Is their ability to slow down their perceptions under their control, or is it some kind of reflex? How can a speedster ever get blindsided or ambushed if they can functionally freeze time whenever they want? And if the character can't control it, are they forced to experience the rest of the world in agonizing slow motion? Do they find every conversation unbelievably boring and slow because it's happening at 1/1000th the pace? Are they completely isolated because nobody can keep up with them? Do they experience their own pain 1,000 times longer than a normal human being? Also, if they're seeing the world in slow motion, do they even see themselves as fast? Does a speedster running across the country feel themselves take every step? Do they experience it as the days or weeks it would take to realistically cross that distance on foot, and it just looks super fast from the outside? Do they have to stop for food every few nanoseconds because from their POV it's been hours? That sounds a lot less fun than just zipping from coast to coast in a flash of lightning. If the speedster doesn't even get to feel fast, would the power even be any fun to have? Some of these questions are partially addressed or played with by writers. Speedsters frequently canonically have extremely rapid metabolisms and do need to eat a lot all the time. Some of them do describe the rest of the world as frustratingly or even painfully slow, but they're clearly not constantly experiencing the world in the extreme slow motion they're demonstrably capable of reaching, right? Holding a conversation like that would be like remembering what someone was saying 3 weeks ago. This can also be confusing even when limited to the specific context of combat. It's difficult to justify a character who can essentially stop time ever getting, like, punched. Like, how did that happen? Did they just not see it coming? Were they just looking the other way for what felt like 6 hours? And sometimes this also gets explored. Sometimes a character's super speed isn't just active whenever they move, but instead seems more like a higher gear or a funky, zappy dimensional overlay or something, a tangibly and demonstrably different state of being than their regular speed activities, a mode they shift into on reflex or as they ramp up their running, or that they manually choose to activate when they need the boost. And when they're not in speed mode, they can get punched like anyone else. This is still a little funky and hard to justify sometimes, but it's got implied rules that we can loosely wrap our heads around, and if we can get a feel for how the power works, it's easier to not get caught up in the fridge logic of it all, as long as what's happening on screen feels plausible enough. Sometimes this sort of perception speed ramp up is even articulated. In the Justice League cartoon, Flash mentions that he's had a recurring nightmare about being stuck in high gear, where he goes too fast and can't slow down to normal, which indicates that his top speed does let him perceive the world in nearly total slow motion, but his normal speed doesn't do that. It's still not fully laid out for us, but it is often indicated that the speed at which the speedster is moving scales the speed at which they perceive the world. The faster they go, the slower everyone else seems. But at the same time, isn't that tautological? The slower the world seems to them, the faster they can go in relation to it, as long as they always see themselves as moving full speed. Characters with no super speed can still give the impression of super speed by activating time stop powers, but they're not really going fast, right? From their perspective, they're jogging around, catching their breath and arranging the situation as they please, but they're not zooming around Sonic style. Having the power to change your perception of time isn't the same thing as having the power to go fast, right? Wait, but is it? Well, relatively speaking, it absolutely is. Speed is relative to frame of reference. We're all whipping around the sun at around 19 miles per second, but none of us feel like we're moving that fast because everything around us is also moving that fast. If you're driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour and someone passes you doing 80, from your frame of reference, it'd look the same if you were standing still and they were creeping along at 10 miles an hour. It takes the context of the wind in your face, the sound and movement of the road, and the speedometer for you to feel like they're going fast. It doesn't matter how fast something is, if it doesn't feel fast relative to our perception of it. The entire point of a speedster is that they go fast, which is why it feels strangely disappointing and jarring if we pivot to their POV and instead of fast, all we get is everything else is slow. Even though those should really be the same thing, right? Why is it that the more we think about how speedsters work, the less fast they end up feeling? And therein lies the nuanced, beating heart of the speedster perception problem. And I think a lot of it honestly has less to do with speed and more to do with time. Because here's the thing, the actual human experience of time is not linear. It scales wildly depending on circumstance and situation. Someone really interested and engaged with a project can find the hours flying off the clock as they seemingly warp speed through it, while a situation that's tense, boring, or actively painful can stretch out into an infinite time warp of crystalline prison, where 10 minutes can take 3 whole hours to slog through. In a moment of crisis, time can seem to slow or even freeze. We do not perceive time at a constant rate of 1 second per second. And this is a thing everyone is aware of on some level, but it's not an intuitive thing to translate into a cinematic medium, where time does pass at a rate of 1 second per second unless slowed down or sped up for cinematic effect. Slow motion and undercrank can replicate the feeling of the flexible perception of time by making that flexibility literal on the screen. So theoretically, it should be kind of easy to understand what the world might feel like for a speedster, right? Maybe they can zip through those incredibly engrossing projects in a real split second of intense hyperfixated focus, and because that already feels like a time warp when that happens to us in real life, we can relate. Maybe when they're stuck in a situation that's boring or painful or terrifying, they see the seconds literally stretch out around them into a scenario that feels hours long and slow as molasses, just like those terrible final 10 minutes of class that somehow managed to crawl along for a life age of the Earth. If real human perception of time is already this flexible, why is it so difficult to wrap our heads around a character whose super speed just makes their tangible interaction with time flexible as well? And honestly, I think a lot of this problem is just the fourth wall. Namely, that this part of the trope interacts with the fourth wall in a very strange way. When the audience sees the footage go slow-mo, usually the assumption is not that time is actually slowing around them, but just that the director wanted to capture the feeling of ponderous temporal strangeness, to communicate that the character feels like they're trapped in a slow moment or is being utterly overwhelmed by the world racing around them. But then when a character pops into one of those distorted scenes at normal speed, we experience a certain jarring recalibration as we realize that the slow motion is diegetic. And that makes us start questioning, consciously or not, how the character perceives the world around them all the time. It's not so strange that the character might perceive different scenarios at different relative speeds, because that's a thing we can relate to. It's completely understandable that a fight scene might play out in slow motion as the character in it finds it chaotic and overwhelming, or even that a very smart character sees a situation in slow motion as their mind races to unpack everything around them, perceiving the world around them in a way that the director can only portray with a non-diegetic slowdown. But a major part of the speedster perception problem comes from the audience's newfound confusion over which elements of the scene playing out before them are literally happening and which ones aren't. This is comparable to, like, a character who suddenly seems able to hear the background music. An audience who sees that isn't going to be able to stop thinking about what kind of world that character is living in 24/7. And even when we disregard the time factor, the speed itself can still be strangely difficult to appreciate if it's too closely examined. As a species, humans are really big fans of going fast. We've been inventing new ways to go fast since the first ancient human looked at a proto-horse and thought, I can make that thing way more medically complex. The speedster perception problem is an interesting manifestation of an arc that almost every speedster character eventually goes through. No matter how fast they run, it never feels fast enough. There's always a new threshold of fastness to reach, a new gear to click into, another wall to break through. They have to get faster, because no matter how fast they run, their frame of reference follows them. They can never outrun their own 0 point. From their own perspective, they will always be standing still, with the world slowing to a crawl around them. And an audience following them has the privilege of watching their movement at something resembling normal speed, watching them zip around and be speedy and rad. But there's always that underlying feeling when we see them blur across the screen. The awareness on the part of the audience that we aren't really following this character as closely as we could be, because we can't keep up with them. We're not really part of the character's frame of reference, because if we were, we wouldn't be seeing them as fast, which defeats the entire appeal of the superpower, which is go fast. And when we do get to follow them through their top speed in a time-in-a-bottle slowdown rearranging the battlefield montage, it doesn't make them feel fast so much as it makes us wonder how they can stand to move through a world that slow. And this all happens because when we think of how speed feels, it is not, in fact, that everything else feels slow around us. It's that our speed makes everything else feel fast. It's that driving in a fast car or sprinting down a slope surrounds you with the wind, and the wind's not moving on its own, but its stillness is what makes it move relative to your movement through it. The wind and the ground can't keep up with you, so it falls behind as fast as you're moving forward. When you go fast, the world goes fast around you. When you slow it all down, that effect goes away. It is not enough to go fast. We must also show the fast. A character who is fast will only feel fast if the audience cannot keep pace with them. It's a very strange little narrative paradox that really only becomes a problem if you're catastrophically prone to overthinking, but I guess it's true what they say. The problem with being faster than light is that you can only live in darkness. So yeah,